We do know that both Russia and China have been increasing their investments in South America. The Venezuelans have had a large degree of success politically with other Central and South American nations when it comes to the organization of American states in the decades previously when America has tried to isolate Venezuela. And under the previous Mexican president, now under President Sheinbaum of Mexico, there's been a renewed emphasis on CELAC, the community of Central American and Caribbean states. And I think that when you look at that and their close ties to the Chinese, I see that, the United States government has been pursuing a policy of probably sending a warning shot towards both the Chinese as well as the Russians in the investment in the area, but also to deny potential mining, oil, and mineral resources to a nation state that has been, having first, base trading partners being places like Cuba, Colombia, China, and other nations that are not so favorable to the United States. So on the grand scheme of things geopolitically, I think that there's a very difficult tightrope to walk because history proves to us, at least for right now, that things are very likely to go wrong. But at the same time, with this administration focusing so much on immigration restrictionism, focusing on counter-terror and counter-narcotics operations, this may be a different course of events to go, and only time will tell as this unfolds.
Yeah, it was kind of a bizarre development because, of course, everyone looked at what happened with the Iran strikes, right? And the discussion around that at the time was, a lot of us, I think both you and I included in this, were very concerned that those Iran strikes could turn into a larger on-the-ground regime change war. It's clearly something that Israel was interested in, and we're worried that the United States would be pulled into that longer conflict. Turned out, in that case, they did restrict themselves to a couple bombing runs for the most part before removing U.S. involvement in that conflict. And the idea was kind of the narrative that was being built was like, okay, yes, Trump is the kind of guy who's going to do military strikes, but it's not going to be regime change wars, right? These are going to be quick decapitation strikes. They're going to be tactical deployments of military force in very limited situations. And that kind of calmed people down a little bit. Okay, well, I guess, yeah, we sometimes have to get involved, but at least we're not entering into protracted conflicts with no exit strategy, no long-term goals. We're not trying to spread liberal democracy around the world. And when this strike initially happened, that was kind of the narrative that was coming a lot out of kind of administration defenders and that kind of thing. Don't worry, guys, it's just like Iran. They're gonna get Maduro, and then that's gonna kind of be the end of it. Well, then Trump just walked out during the press conference and said, no, we're running Venezuela. Like, obviously, like we are going to be controlling the country top to bottom in the interim because we want to make sure there's the right transition and the person involved is going to be favorable to us. It's like, okay, well, it's pretty hard to call this anything other than a regime change war then, right? Now, the good news, I guess, in theory, is that the war is supposed to already be over, but this isn't quite the fait accompli because, as you point out, they got Maduro, but like the rest of his government's all in power. Like they're all still there. Yeah, he was kind of a strong man in a sense. He was a guy who had a lot of power concentrated in his presence there. So the current government is kind of in disarray to a certain level. Perhaps they're not really loyal to his ideology or the system. They simply were taking orders and they'll just fall in behind whoever the U.S. kind of props up as the next guy. But ultimately, it feels like you're in a kind of a precarious situation because you're kind of declaring victory without having full control of the situation on the ground. And it feels like you can't have control of the full situation on the ground without being on the ground, which, again, sounds like we're placing ourselves pretty strongly in that regime change category. Now, this is something that Trump has explicitly said multiple times he is not interested in doing. Yeah, we're going to have strength. We're going to have these kind of things. If we need to do big, amazing American military strikes, then we'll do those. And again, credit to where it's due to the operators who pulled this off, the soldiers who pulled this off. It does seem to be very impressive. Very, very easy to cheer on the excellence of the American military in this situation. It's not like Maduro was a good guy. So, don't feel bad for him either. However, you really are in the situation where it seems like a direct contradiction of a lot of the promises that were made about the foreign policy. Now, I think you are someone who's probably more sympathetic to this problem than many others because you bring it up whenever someone talks about, geopolitics. just because you don't want to be an empire anymore doesn't mean your enemies stop being empires, right? Like if you pull away from the world scene, as you say, China, Russia, they're trying to establish these footholds for a reason. They know that ultimately being positioned near the United States, having a foothold in these areas isn't just beneficial when it comes to economics or resources, oil, these kind of things. It's also important because it gives you the possibility of influencing nations that are near one of your largest competitors that could possibly, obviously everyone thinks of Cuba and the missile crisis. Does Russia not put any missiles in Cuba if the United States is being very careful at that time with its expansion? Maybe, maybe not, but it's entirely possible that they decide to do it just because it's good to have missiles next to a country that is that big and that much of a rival. So can America ultimately even avoid having these kind of conflicts? I mean, as we understand it, the Chinese delegation was actually in Venezuela while Maduro was being captured, which I bet is probably not some coincidence. It probably meant to send a very powerful message. So is this ultimately a promise that Trump simply cannot keep because of the geopolitical reality? Or do you think there are other kind of machinations going on behind the scenes?
Well, again, we're talking about this, 2 days and some change after the
Right.
events have unfolded. I mean, there's plenty of machinations, I'm sure, that we as in the commentariat sphere are not going to get access to anytime soon, if at all. And when things are announced accordingly, I mean, we'll have to provide our analysis on those very specific issues and go from there. I mean, also in the long scheme of things, the debate about empire or maintaining strategic areas of influence or denial of access to your enemies on a geopolitical front. I mean, this is the historical reality. Some individuals have called this the tragedy of great power politics. Mearsheimer wrote that book 30 years ago. He also discussed in that text that you do really need land forces, specifically bodies on the ground, if you actually want to hold territory. So, it is something important. And it's also been a long-standing debate inside American foreign policy circles and academia for both of our lifetimes put together. You can look at the writings of George Kennan versus William Appleman Williams over the need of either denial or containment, or this tragedy of American diplomacy, as he looks at it as an empire as a way of life, or at least Williams certainly does, citing that this has been the way going forward. And when we look at those debates, there are a lot of internal contradictions to American foreign policy. But for the first time, at least with this administration, I mean, we saw this as well with the first Trump administration, it seems at least that there has been a more actual nation-centered policy for the United States. I mean, he claims things are America first. He's been trying to pursue that to the best of his ability, I think, in a large regard. And also because we live in a media environment where the bad news sticks, and it doesn't allow us to think or critically engage or research maybe the 5 or 10 things that are actually going on that we can look up on the websites for the federal government and their respective branches. That it makes it very difficult for us to, I think, maybe sometimes give the best take forward on these issues. But I think when it comes to Venezuela, I know that we just earlier today, we had a White House reporter for the Associated Press who's been with the Washington Post. This was Seong Kim. She writes here that the U.S. is not going to govern Venezuela, but will press changes through an oil blockade, according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, clarifying Trump's claims about running the country. So, I mean, we'll see what happens that way. I mean, there are international and economic pressures to do so. And I mean, after that sign and show of strength where no American service members have been lost, I think that maybe upwards to 80 is the current death toll or count for security forces or those that may have been killed in the operation that took place on the Venezuelan side. I don't think that the sitting vice president or now acting president of Venezuela is going to have much of a choice. And at the same time, the United States is currently trying to deal with the Russians over the conflict in Ukraine. Our biggest issue may have to be dealing with China, but China doesn't have the assets on the ground in that area for us to seriously contend with them potentially in a strategic platform. We'll see what happens diplomatically. But overall, I mean, also Venezuela has been a sort of big part of the American fifth column when it comes to democratic socialists in the United States. They had people like Evo Morales as well as Nicolas Maduro be these speakers or people that they could visit on these tours to Venezuela back in the early 2020s, as well as during the Obama administration era as well. So, I mean, when we look at these things, it really does come to show that, one, the American government, I think, in a lot of ways is, I don't want to say retreading old ground, because this isn't like Grenada or Panama or anything like that from the 80s, but it is something to look at and seriously consider that America's had a long-standing presence in the Middle East, or not the Middle East, well, we've had too, but inside of the Caribbean and Latin American countries, and that if it's pursuant to whatever this government says is in the American interest, I have a feeling they're going to do it regardless of what we say. But I think that these internal contradictions and debates about nation building and interventionism and governing the place, or just using economic pressures to do so, there's a lot more machinations behind the scenes that I imagine will unfold in due time. And I don't want to speculate wildly, but history does give us a pretty effective guide as to how these things have gone in the past.
Hey guys, if you've been watching this show for a while, then you know that around here we encourage something that conservatives usually don't do. You know, winning. If you like what I'm doing here and you want to keep it going, then head over to Blaze TV. They have the behind-the-scenes content, exclusives, and documentaries that you're just not going to see anywhere else. So go to blazetv.com/Oren and subscribe today. The promo code is AURON, and you'll save $20 right now off the annual plan.